Hello, my name is Alex Giles, and in today's episode we're going to be talking about William Rufus and his effect on the Anglo-Scottish border. Welcome back. So now we're going to continue looking at the kings of England, the kings of Scotland, and the conflict between both of them that would form the Anglo-Scottish border. And in today's episode we're going to be focusing on William II, William Rufus, who's one of the sons of William the Conqueror. You're going to be able to see the conflicts between these two kingdoms, the raiding, the fighting, the killing, and all of that stuff that you probably love when you're looking at British history, because it's a really complicated and quite a bloody bit of history of the world. So if you like the sound of that, if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe, and let's jump right in, because William the Conqueror has just died. When William the Conqueror dies, he leaves three sons behind him. We have the eldest, Robert Curthose. He gets Normandy. The second son, William II, William Rufus, he gets England. And the third son, Henry, who is going to be later on Henry I, and we'll come to him later, he gets just a huge sum of cash and is left to his own devices. And so because of that, immediately we see that the conqueror's sons are divided up, and they basically are given portions of his previous kingdom. Now it's important to mention how medieval kingship actually worked back then, and some of the complexities that went with that. So first of all, kings could actually be vassals of other kings within other territories. Now this is the sort of weird situation that William found himself in. So William was the Duke of Normandy. So he was a vassal of the King of France. But he was also King of England, and therefore his own independent ruler, separate from the French king. Now, across in Britain, we see a very similar thing going on. So from the Anglo-Saxon period, the kings of Scotland had often been forced, or had willingly sworn submission to the kings of Anglo-Saxon England. So for instance, Malcolm III of Scotland had sworn that he was a sub-king of Edward the Confessor. So we're seeing already that there's a complicated situation here, and that had gone right the way back into the 10th century. So there was a lot of water under the bridge that suggested that the kings of Scotland were sub-kings under the kings of England. And that made the situation quite difficult, and often would lead to war, just as later on in the 100-Year War we would see England and France go to war against each other over very, very similar reasons. And that's where you see the conflict going on within the British Isles that would develop over time, because of the fact that Scotland would be supported by France. England would then be fighting on two fronts, as the Dukes of Normandy in France, and also on their northern border against Scotland. And that's why the Anglo-Scottish border became such a contentious issue. And on top of this as well, with Malcolm III, what makes him a complex character is that his uncle was actually Sveinverd, who was the Norwegian Earl of Northumbria under Knut. His sister had married into the Scottish line, and so from there he was descended from an Earl of Northumbria. And so because he was descended from an Earl of Northumbria, that then meant he had a claim on Northumbria, and he felt that Northumbria should belong to him. Alongside this as well, it would also make his borders a lot more simple, because at this time Cumbria was actually a part of Scotland, because of the fact that Scotland had inherited the Kingdom of Strathclyde. So because of that, the area that we know as Cumbria today, made up of Cumberland and Westmoreland, was actually a part of Scotland. So the border was much larger, much more complicated between the Norman Kingdom of England and the Kingdom of Scotland back then as well. Now let's jump into the politics. Straight away, when William II becomes King of England, he is faced by a rebellion, because his earls and lords want to put his brother, Robert Curthose, as the King of England. And even in the north, Robert de Mowbray, the Earl of Northumberland, revolts against him alongside St Calais. And St Calais is actually the Bishop of Durham. So we can see the two most powerful individuals in the north of England are now revolting against him. Obviously the Bishop of Durham and the Earl of Northumberland. And he manages to put that down, and St Calais is banished. He goes across to the continent, and he starts seeing the cathedral building that was going on in the 11th century, and all of the different things that were going on across there, and starts to become inspired, because he's in this amazing cultural revolution that's going on with the Romanesque tradition coming through France, and he really wants to be a part of that, and he's really inspired by it. So he flees across to Normandy, and he's across there. Alongside this as well, we see Aldwin, the last prior of Durham Cathedral, passing away. And so when he passes away, Turgot then succeeds him, and he's going to be very important in shaping the way that Durham Cathedral develops, both politically and socially, going on into the 12th century. So that's one of the things there. Now in 1091, Malcolm III seizes his chance and he invades northern England, and he actually goes as far as Chester Street as raiding and pillaging and causing quite a lot of damage, while a Norman fleet is actually destroyed off the coast of England. On top of this as well, he then repeats this in 1092 and he starts fighting against the Normans more extensively. Now when this happens, William then defeats Malcolm III and he forces him into tribute, meaning that he has to cede Cumbria. And when he cedes Cumbria, the borders for the Normans are now much more simple. That means that they just have a straight border across, they can defend it much more easily, and they build Carlisle Castle. And when they build Carlisle Castle, this then secures the north in many ways, because there's now a large fortification in the northwest, and that means the northeast can develop a lot more. And we see the development of Newcastle from this point onwards, because they don't have to worry as much about raids from Scotland, so it becomes more of an economic centre in the north of England. And so that's really starting to change the way things are working. Now obviously the next year, 1093, there is no way that Malcolm's going to let that happen, and he starts pressing his borders. And what's really interesting is in 1093, Durham Cathedral is started. So St Calise is then forgiven by William and he's allowed to come back across, and he has amalgamated a huge amount of wealth while he's been across on the continent, and he decides that he's going to totally rebuild Durham Cathedral in the Romanesque fashion, and he wants it to be the largest cathedral in Western Europe. And when he wants it to be the largest cathedral in Western Europe, he then plans for it to be at least 60 centimetres wider and 120 centimetres longer than Old St Paul's in Rome. So that therefore means that the Bishop of Durham would have the largest church in Christendom, and therefore if he had the largest church in Christendom, there's something going on there. You can see that sort of rivalry between different bishops and different priests, and why they're wanting to establish themselves almost as their own mini kings in and amongst medieval Europe. So he starts building that, and when he does that, the first stones are laid by, obviously prior to Turgot, William Caliph himself, so he's actually establishing it. And then alongside that as well, Malcolm III comes down and he lays some of the first stones of Durham Cathedral. Now obviously when he does that, he later on decides that he is now going to start pressing his claim militarily into northern England, and in 1093 he comes down and he besieges Alnwick Castle. When he besieges Alnwick Castle, he is ambushed by Robert de Mowbray, and when he's ambushed by him, he is killed in battle. When he's killed in battle, his son is critically wounded and actually dies 3 days later on the 16th of November. So Malcolm dies on the 13th of November in battle, his son is critically injured, dies on the 16th of November 1093. So when they're both dead, his wife Margaret then obviously dies of illness as well up in Scotland. She passes away, and then his grandson, he's a young lad, Duncan II, is left king, and he's a very short-lived king. He only lasts 1 year before he is then succeeded by King Edgar, and King Edgar is the fourth son of Malcolm. When he's the fourth son of Malcolm, he's got an Anglo-Saxon name because his mother was actually a part of the dynasty of Wessex, the previous Anglo-Saxon kings of England. So he then comes and he actually goes, and in 1094 he conquers Lothian. When he conquers Lothian, that then means that he is then in a position of strength, and he's taken that back from the Normans. But Edgar Aelfing, who is actually also a claimant to the Anglo-Saxon throne of England, but he's been defeated by William and is now one of William's knights, goes out and campaigns on behalf of him, and he then conquers Lothian back, and that becomes a part of England. So the English are now in a very strong position. They've restored the Anglo-Saxon borders, they've taken over Cumbria, and now they're in a very, very strong position against the kings of Scotland. Now, even though William Rufus has had these victories and he's winning in the north, it's not that easy, because his lords, his own Norman lords, are his biggest danger against him, and they actually plan a revolt against him. When they plan a revolt against him, Robert de Mowbray, the Earl of Northumbria, is one of the key conspirators, and they're planning to usurp against him and place one of the counts from France as the new king of England. So Robert de Mowbray is planning this rebellion against him, and what he does is he actually confiscates a number of Norwegian ships at Tynemouth and also takes over Newcastle. Now when he does this, the Norwegians actually go and seek recompense with William Rufus. They go down to him and they say, look, our ships have been confiscated by Robert de Mowbray, and what happens is that William sends a letter up to him demanding he comes down to London to face a court and to explain to Parliament why he's done this to the Norwegians. He doesn't turn up. And so because of that, William declares that he is now in open rebellion against him, and he marches up against Robert de Mowbray. Robert de Mowbray then retreats back to Bamburgh, and when he retreats back to Bamburgh, this is his castle, he fortifies it, and what happens is that William II builds a castle outside of Bamburgh, and this is called the evil neighbour or the bad neighbour. And when he builds this, it's like a counter siege. His castle then means that he is being besieged inside of Bamburgh and he's pinned inside of there. So because of that, Robert de Mowbray breaks out. He rides all the way down to Tynemouth, and when he rides down to Tynemouth, he takes over Tynemouth Castle and he stays inside of there, and he goes, all right, we can continue this rebellion. And he's probably planning to take a ship across to France and try and flee, and he's left his wife in charge of Bamburgh Castle. When he leaves his wife in charge of Bamburgh Castle, he is then inside of Tynemouth, and 3 days later he's assaulted by the king's men and he gets injured, brought back up to Bamburgh, and he's tied up outside of Bamburgh Castle. And so what William does is he tells his wife, he says, right, if you don't surrender, I'm going to blind your husband. And blinding at this time was actually quite a popular way of taking someone out of power, because many of these cultures said that if someone was physically disabled, they couldn't be a leader. So she actually surrenders, she hands over Bamburgh, and their marriage is forcibly annulled. She's married to his brother, and he's forced to join a monastery, and he lives out the rest of his days inside a monastery. But this again shows how fragile a position that William Rufus and the early Norman kings of England were in the north. They had rebellions against them from their own earls, who were regularly trying to put their own people who they thought were in a better position to be kings of England or powerful individuals in place of them. But alongside this as well, they also had to face attack from kings of Scotland and stuff like that as well. So when we're seeing all of this going on, there's a lot of different complications. The next year, 1069, St. Caliph, the Bishop of Durham, dies, and for 3 years there's no Bishop of Durham. Actually, William Rufus decides to keep the position empty, and it's probably a political decision to do that. He doesn't want to have a strong bishop in the north who might also be tempted to revolt against him. So because of that, in 1099 he appoints Flambard, Bishop Flambard, to be the new bishop, and he continues the building of Durham Cathedral. So we see that starting to expand again. But in 1100, William Rufus decides to go hunting. And he goes out hunting in the New Forest, and he's just trying to have a bit of downtime to relax, when all of a sudden he is faced with a hunting accident. And when he has a hunting accident, he gets shot and killed. When he gets shot and killed, it's very suspicious in some ways, but his brother Henry was already on his way to London. He arrives in London, and then he goes and secures the royal treasury, declaring himself King of England. And so a new age was going to begin under Henry I. So we'll leave on that cliffhanger right now to see how Henry I will shape the Anglo-Scottish border, the politics of the north, and the development of England and Scotland. So why don't you like and subscribe, share the video with your friends, and if you'd like to support me further, I also have a Ko-fi account and a Patreon account down in the description. That just means I can set aside time for these episodes and to really focus on bringing the history to life for you, as you can see I obviously have a passion for. In the meantime though, stay safe and well, and thank you so much.